about the survey responses from MIRE 2.0 and length in class collection. Take it away, Mr. Drew.
All right, can everybody see me and hear me okay? Hopefully that's a yes.
We're lucky Sia's not watching this presentation because she'd be throwing tomatoes.
Terrible, Drew, terrible.
I remind everyone we are being recorded.
Don't even.
So no stories about past adventures or karaoke or humbuggery from previous years. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I hope everybody else is here. Yes, yes, world champs. KC, wait a minute, Manny. Okay. I hope everybody can get inspired like we usually do. I will try to conjure some of that mojo here for this presentation. I know we have some people who aren't familiar with MIRE, so I will try to give you a quick overview before we jump into everything here. All right, let me minimize this here. Can you guys still see, do you guys see me on my screen, or you guys just see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, you're up top in the middle, probably just like you had seen for us earlier, Drew, and then we see your presentation right below.
All right. So we had talked to some of you guys recently, and there was some interest about kind of just getting a pulse on where other states were at with MIRE. And so this is kind of what precipitated this presentation, or this little session here in the surveys. MIRE, Model Inventory of Roadway Elements. This comes from the FHWA and Office of Safety, and the requirement for September 26th that states have access to AADTs for all paved local roads. And again, these are the different roadway classifications, and we're focused on the local paved roads. What kind of led up to this point was MIRE 1.0 and then MAP 21 and the FAST Act, and just trying to build and enhance safety systems for states. And again, just trying to potentially support other safety and infrastructure programs. And the nuts and bolts of it is the data doesn't have to be submitted. It doesn't have to be stored in-house. States just have to have access to or be able to come up with an AADT on the fly for local paved roads. How they are derived is up to the states. And again, they do not anticipate requesting any of this data. So just a couple quick things you might want to look at: identify the requirement, identify roadways to be counted, select a method, implement, and then assess. And again, just for identify the requirements, the main key here is the annual average daily traffic. So I don't know how many of you guys are getting counts from your locals, or what partnerships look like with your locals where you guys are, but that's kind of been the focus of where things are going, I guess. And so using existing traffic counts from state or local sources to derive this count, or foster those relationships to gain access to those counts, or develop a sampling method of your own. And some of the challenges, again, this unfunded mandate. So just trying to find where you're going to put those resources to get the best data quality that you can get with the resources you have is going to be a big deal here. So that's pretty much an overview, a high-level overview of MIRE 2.0. So we sent out these surveys, and we were literally inundated with 5 responses. So you guys will be helping me out here now that I have you guys, and hopefully this will be beneficial for everybody, because I think a lot of people are wondering what other people are doing. So approximately how many paved local road AADTs does your organization have access to? So at the top, we have Wisconsin, then we have Wyoming, Idaho, and Minnesota. And Minnesota actually has 29,113. I don't know again,
Laura, was that the updated numbers I sent you?
What's
yes.
on, yeah, what Drew said is updated. What's on the screen was the original response. So
Yep. This is
Okay.
actually incorrect.
And we changed it based on, I clarified what is meant by local. So it's not the functional class local, it's the ownership of the road. Is that correct?
Okay. Yep. Because it was broken down to, I think, 20,006 that you guys had counted, and then 9,107 were the locals that you were mentioning.
Correct. And that was based on the ownership of the road, not its
Okay.
functional class.
Okay. Okay.
Well, this is Susie, and I'm looking at Wisconsin's number for paved local roads. And do you have 1,000? Is that what you have? Or, oh, it's just saying how many paved local road AADPs do they have access to? Okay, I'm good there.
And the goal is just to kind of get you guys thinking in terms of what do we currently have to get your minds going. What do we need to do? Kind of like a small gap analysis, I guess. It's like my oldest just went to college. I dropped him off last month, and it's like, it's coming. You know it's coming, but then all of a sudden it's there, and then it's like, where did the time go? So that's kind of what's driving the questions to the survey. Slide this down here. Was somebody gonna say something?
Margaret had a chat. Who attended the last Talking Traffic webinar? Anyone?
I was
One
there.
from July.
Yep, Rob did. It's that did.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting one because VHB has been working at peer exchanges, and I've been to a couple of the peer exchanges, and they've been developing some best practices for estimating AADTs. Is that something, as this settles out, because I mean, we've always had to collect the data on the federal aid system, but as all of this settles out, and now we are looking at the functionally classified local paved roads, are we going to be able to implement anything in Jackalope that will allow us to better manage that?
You know,
I mean,
Margaret,
you guys are looking for.
and first, when they had that July session, I think they swapped out what was going to be on class and length was what was posted. And then they ended up doing local paved AADT and TTI from Yanni from TTI. And then I believe Montana did a presentation. We're still waiting for the final report. So I think what Yanni covered was really worthwhile. And HTT did do a follow-up to see if we could better understand some of the statistical things that he was sharing in there. It was way over my head. I'm going to just tell you, when we started drilling down into some of the stuff that he was talking about, ways to derive that paved AADT on local roads. So I think until we get the final report and can review that, can HTT really speak to that?
But I will say the will is there, Margaret. I mean, I would love to be able to have some methodology where you can compute ADTs, where there's a scarcity of data. So yeah, I mean, Susie actually bent over backwards trying to get the presentation to show me because I was not at the Talking Traffic seminar. So, but yeah, the will is there for sure.
For Minnesota, we were one of the pilot states, and they recommended we use a combination of urban rural functional class and then employment density based on census information. So that would be the question of how do we get those groupings into Jackalope. We can always sample and submit, counts within those groups, but then how do we manage those grouping attributes?
Yeah. And rural states are so different than urban states that an AADT of 0 is a perfectly valid AADT, and we're going to have a whole lot of paved roads that are sitting 0 or close to 0. So yeah, we're looking at this, but we're trying to figure out how we take this from something that is manual, because while the FAST Act only requires that states make the data available on the LRS, they don't talk about maintenance, but I'm also the HSIP program manager, and looking at it from a safety analysis perspective, if we're not going to maintain this data, then we shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Agreed.
No comments on that one. It is coming from Office of Safety, and I think maybe, Drew, if you finish the survey and then we open it up and talk about some of the methods, because I'm curious, because one of the questions was, I think, to the DOTs, if anybody has started looking at this, and then in the interim, then of course the study is coming out.
Yep, I can shoot through this quick. So one of the methods too and tools, I guess, is probe data, like cell, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth stuff. And this was 40% that agencies were using this. And I guess the sample size again is 5, so take that into account. But 40% have access to some sort of probe data, but just not being used to calculate the ADTs. But nobody was actually using it currently to derive ADTs. And then, does your agency have or organization have a plan in place for meeting MIRE? 60% said yes, 40% said no. And I guess I'd be curious too, when we do open this up, if people would go through or even just throw something in the chat to say, you know, Nevada, no or yes, just so we can get a little more info there. That'd be great. I'm not mean like Joe, so I won't make anybody share their screen or their webcam to answer the questions. If your organization has a plan in place, kind of describe it below. And I guess we'll kind of get into that after this. All right, so 60% of people have been doing research related to this. And then the rest weren't sure. And then, do you anticipate hiring contractors to meet the requirement? 40%, 40%, 20%. So I guess, like I said, with the responses we got, it's kind of hard to really get a pulse. So I'm really counting on you guys, I guess, at this point to kind of open it up and open the floodgates up. And
so and I wanted to sort of ask, because, you know, I saw also Minnesota was part of that study, and TTI reached out to you. So when they did that portion of that study, and Christy, you were talking a little bit about that. I'm curious, did they just pull, what did they pull that they used to be able to derive it then?
I gave them a lot of information. We provided them a set of our LRS, which had a ton of attributes on it, like urban rural functional class. We provided all available historic counts going back as far as we could. And we provided some historical information on how we currently provide this for HPMS reporting, which is based on 30-year-old counts on, you know, like a rural local in a county might have a default of like 20 ADT. So we provided background information for them on where that came from. So they got several very large access databases and some GIS files from us, and then they worked on it for probably 8 months and then met with us to go over some initial information.
Okay.
And then they did a statistical analysis to sort of tell us how many counts we would have to do to maintain our current stratification of like basically county by county and route system by route system. And that they recommended we be doing like 6,000 counts where if we moved to the recommended stratification, it was only like 1,100 counts. So I think really the question is how to add more data collection to programs that are not funded to do so. And the questions internally we have are, how good does this data have to be? Like, what are the precision and accuracy requirements? And then will that play into the project that they're doing with probe data? And will any probe data be allowed to be used for this based on how good probe data is compared to these low volumes in rural areas?
I think when we talked to Office of Safety last, and Drew, you can, confirm this, but I don't believe that they had any parameters for determining the precision or accuracy of what the state DOTs were going to have access for the local paved AADTs.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's really hard for us to know where to start if they don't tell us like how accurate it has to be, because I could just come up with a number.
I'm going to sort of put this out there for everyone to recall, and I was going to mention this in cluster analysis as we start thinking about the variability of traffic data, and think about when we did not collect motorcycle. And then that was back in 2008 was the first time we had to submit it, and that data was poopy data. That data was not good at all. Everybody had to redo their bins, the equipment wasn't right, and I think FHWA recognizes that for states to have access to local paved AADT data is sort of the first step, where I believe, Margaret, you talked about building relationships with your local municipalities to start having access. And I think, Nicholas, we had conversation on that too. So I don't think FHWA is looking for it to be solid, and they recognize how long it takes. Look, it took, what, 8 months just for TTI to wrap up their research, and it was really good research, but that was 8 months of looking at data and then refining the process. So I think the goal is for states to start thinking about how they're going to have access to it, and over time to have that refinement applied. That's just my perspective after listening and asking the same questions that a lot of the DOTs are asking. At what level is bad, how are you going to use bad data? Well, I know for a couple of years, motorcycle was bad data, but I think the refinement over those years has improved it.
Can we start to talk about it in terms of, so for HPMS, we need to come up with the VMT summaries by functional class. And so you have to plug in an ADT for all of these roads anyway. Are states planning on just using that and not having like two separate efforts, where if you can get real counts, they would go into Jackalope, and where you can't, you would just use your non-federal aid process to fulfill the MIRE requirements as well?
I know for Idaho, that is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. Like I said, I also work for the Office of Highway Safety. I kind of have dual roles here, and we look at the roadway characteristic data as well as the intersection and traffic data. And for us, what it ultimately we're looking for is how can we start identifying systemic safety issues in roadways. And so when we're going out and we're collecting, now we know we're not going to get really high precision, particularly in the rural areas. That's why we're working so hard to develop relationships with our local MPOs, because they are willing to give us their data. But when we're looking at our analysis, we do need to have at least a decent estimation. We're not looking for perfection, but there's a big difference between a road that has 10 cars on it and a road that has 150 cars on it. when you're looking at the safety analysis because you've got a greater potential. And so we're trying, I think one of the things that we're looking towards is not necessarily having an exacting number, but having an estimate on different types of roads. But our biggest issue is how do we know which ones are going to fall into which categories?
Margaret, when you said fall into which category, what's the category you're?
Volume groups. I mean, what should our volume groups really be? I mean, if we start looking at estimates, one of the things that we've talked about is if we start looking at estimates and then we just start putting them into different bins of here are the different types of volume groups we have. That's one potential strategy. And right now, a lot of what we're doing is just a little bit of wait and see and keeping an eye and having discussions. We haven't settled on a plan. We've been waiting for some of the research to come out, and there's been a lot of research that's going to start coming out like now with TTI. When Federal Highways and TTI and VHB and everybody were having all the peer exchanges, there was a lot of discussion, and those are starting to kind of bear a little bit of fruit now. So that's kind of where we are, is how are we going to approach it? But for me, like I said, if we're not going to maintain this, there's no point in doing it. I mean, yeah, we could split up things, but then it's absolutely useless for us. And we're not going to be able to identify some of those things that we actually want this, because this is going to give us an opportunity to really look at in the rural areas, where are our systemic issues that maybe if we just do, one thing across the state, local and state agencies, maybe that's something that we could pair up on it. I mean, those are the types of things that we're looking for in the future.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with both you, Drew, and Susie on this prior. We hit some snags. I mean, internally funding wise, and where we were going forward. But it's a mixed bag depending on who you talk with. On the traffic and safety end, they're not really wanting to fully jump into this just for the fact that they don't even understand it internally, at least on our UDOT end, and aren't quite sure whether there's complete value in getting data in there for that. Then on our business system end, it's, they're developing a system to make that data available, but they're not taking any consideration on how good that data is going to be, and what application that will be useful for outside of being able to provide that data if the data is there. And then on the TTI presentation, I have to point towards Margaret's end too, just for the fact that, they kind of really lean towards saying to use a statewide type model when looking at that census information. And I had a really hard time understanding on how that would work in Utah specifically, where we have, some major urban areas that have a lot of local roads, as well as a lot of rural areas, but the rural areas are really divided in type of traffic that they have based on just either being rural or having a heavy impact on recreational.
Yeah, I could see that'd be hard. If you've got a lot of recreation, does that correlate to having a lot of employment as well or not? Like, how would you quantify that?
No, I mean, unless we're employing a ton of park rangers.
Yeah.
And we know that's not the case.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, there's some similar stuff in Minnesota, especially with the pandemic, that all the state parks and everything recreational is getting a lot more use this year. But if you were to, build a census, look at the employment density in a census block that has a state park, it wouldn't necessarily include the proper traffic going in. We have reached out to our natural resources division to see if they're counting the entrances to state parks, and I think they are. So we're going to hopefully get data from them to help improve that. But
Yeah, and the hard part about that with right now is the fact that a lot of that recreational traffic is local and not your, foreign travelers that you normally would have this time of year.
Oh, speak for yourself. We're getting a lot of, their eastern part of our state, over 50% of people going to our parks are from out of state.
Yeah. So obviously it's different.
So maybe an action item to like, at least for Jackalope group to bring back to the feds with MIRE would be, we need some sort of targets of how accurate this has to be, because if it doesn't have to be that accurate, we might use other sources of information or spend less time and resources coming up with these numbers. But if it's meant to be as accurate as like the HPMS submittal, then that's a different financial commitment, long term even.
I think we can answer that now. And I don't think we need to take that back to the Office of Safety. The couple of times we've had chats with Bob Pollock, how would we be able to, and not only how would the states be able to, but how would federal highways be able to determine that precision or accuracy of a paved local AADT? So I think you're right, Christy, hitting on the budget, because I think budgets are an issue for DOTs right now because the pandemic has shifted a lot of those dollars. That right now the first step is access to that data. And anybody can say, oh yeah, that's true, Susie, or no, I think you got water in your head. But I think what I'm saying is correct.
Well, I mean, MnDOT has access to a lot of data, but where local agencies count is, at least for Minnesota, very skewed towards higher ADTs. So we still have the problem of the non-federal aid roads. And so that's an entire system that we have to feed data into. It would make more sense to not have two different systems with two different requirements of accuracy. So,
And
I mean, Ian, our statistician, is on the line. So I think the question would be,
Ian,
like, what do we need to know?
I think we are
Sure.
looking at functionally classed local roads. I don't think we are looking at all non-state highways. And I think, Drew, you shot me something that I looked at and I thought, because there's a distinction. And I think we're looking specifically at a functionally classed local road.
It'd be functionally classed local or functionally classed minor collector that's rural that we're looking at. Things that we had to collect before.
And I think we can we'll get back to you on that. And I think on the final report, again, when HDT gets, I wanted the recording from the traffic talking traffic. That's really what I was hoping for, because when Yanni was covering about 10 of his slides or 8 of his slides, he lost me for sure. And I said, hey, Joe, I think you got to hear this because I didn't understand it. So, but I have yet to get the recording, and I thought that FHWA records all that. So Yanni is reaching out to Stephen, and I don't think he has heard back yet on that. So once we get ourselves grounded on that, I think we can speak to it a little more.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is I think overall my goal at UDOT would to make sure that whatever numbers we do report are going to be one and the same, or used as part of what we derive for those HPMS summary tables for VMT.
All right. Does anyone else have anything to add? All right. Thanks, guys, for contributing. Let me move on to the length in class survey. All right. We got 6, I think, Wyoming, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and Idaho in this order. And again, this is going to be another one where feel free to jump in at any point if anyone has a question or clarification question or anything at all, or a comment they'd like to throw in. I don't know if anybody else.
Was this going to be the part, the survey that we were going to then continue annually and maintain this information? Yeah, year over year. I just thought we'd mention that.
It's like the quarterly groups or emails. Because
I don't remember who said that they were interested. Maybe it was Wisconsin. I don't recall. Someone was interested in knowing, you know, or all of you guys might be interested in knowing what all of you are also doing for your collection.
Yeah. And Christy, I don't know if you had mentioned something too about being curious about this one.
Yeah, I think it was an outcome from the user group, the quarterly user group, that they were saying, the states were saying they thought this should be information that should be kept up to date.
Jean, Ian, would this be helpful? I don't want to speak for an area of MnDOT that I don't manage.
Would what be helpful?
Keeping this survey up to date and available for everyone.
Since we most likely are going to be getting in more length-based applications in the future.
Does this help High Desert decide, oh, a lot of states have a lot of length class, we should be focusing on that for software development? We should be thinking about how that impacts FHWA stuff?
We haven't worked out all the bugs on length class yet. Still a lot of,
That'd be a question for Joe.
still a lot of things that we need to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting information to have, just to, Christy, get an idea of where to put the resources. When 2001 TMG? I can't remember now. No, it was after that. Anyway, the one that was really on length classifications, you know, everybody started filling their systems with length classifiers, or allowing their axle classifiers to become length classifiers. And we had to shift a bunch of our resources to accommodate that. And I think it's just good to have a pulse of what's out there from a data quality standpoint.
It's kind of a big difference between 350 and 5500 for the short-term axle class. It's Wyoming at 350, Iowa at 5500. This one was a little bit skewed just because of the way that this turned out, but for the short-term length class counts, it's Idaho 0, Iowa 0, Wyoming 0, Minnesota 10, Kentucky 50, and Wisconsin 800. And then just some of the different equipment used. I don't know if anybody has something that's not on here, or they're trying something different or new that they want to share. And then again, this is the length class collection equipment. I think this might be interesting for some folks. How many length bins are collected, and what does each bin represent? Is anybody doing something that's not one of these?
Curious, did somebody answer they have 13 length bins?
Iowa? Anybody from Iowa?
That's not accurate. That might have been a misunderstanding.
Yeah, because I'm looking at that. That would be the number of class, you know.
Yeah, that's not.
That's not length bins because Iowa doesn't count in length.
So,
Yeah, I mean, there once upon a time, people did try to represent all 13 classes using length. It just didn't work. But yeah, it sounds like those are just the axle-based classification.
3. Okay, they do 3. Ryan?
Brian
Alright.
doesn't do the short term, but he probably knows their length binning.
I did
And I
not
was wondering if you got an answer from them. I noticed that your survey results there don't show who each answer is in response from, and maybe that was intentional, but did Manny?
Yeah, this is what I got.
Okay, so Missouri is not in this output here, Manny.
Feel free to tell us what you're doing.
Hey, Drew and group, I'll make a note to add these surveys, a link to these surveys, and then actually maybe because I know that Minnesota had trouble getting to Google to do surveys. That was something they were prevented from doing legally, to go do Google sort of surveys. So I will include a link to Google surveys and also sort of a spreadsheet you could fill out if that's easier after the conference, and anybody who didn't fill it out or wasn't able to, or maybe they submitted their answers and they weren't retained, they could have an option to do this after the conference, and we'll add it in here and then we'll have it for next year.
That'd be great. Thanks. And I guess this is one I'd ask the group here and for some input. If anybody else is using length data to calculate axle factors, does anybody want to, or is anybody doing that?
Yeah, UDOT is.
Okay. I know Delaware
Are you
was
doing that in Jackalope? Or outside
Jackalope does, but then we do a bit of manual work on the outside.
And do you upload those into the factor interface, or do you have Catherine do it?
We upload the or update our factors manually in the interface for our axle correction factors.
Okay.
Nicholas, do you guys look at bus routes when you do that by chance?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
Todd would know more about that, but I've not heard that before.
I thought maybe Wisconsin was looking at those. Okay, well, that's all I have for the surveys, unless anybody has anything else to add. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, and thank you, Drew. I think it is interesting information, not just for us, but for everybody else to know what their peer states are doing. You know, feel guilty that you don't have as many counters as the state next door, maybe. So it looks like we are running a little